Hello everyone, this is Alex and welcome to Burton Land where we discuss all things Tim Burton. And welcome to another ranking. I'll be going through all of his films, breaking them down into story, characters, music, setting, costumes and makeup, and endings. So far I've gone through the music and story, and in this video I'll be going through the worst to the best characters. This one, I feel, will be one of the most interesting rankings alongside setting when we get there, because, as I said, when I cover the stories ranking, Burton films are much more about characters than plot. I've always been under the belief that characters actually mean more than plot, because I think back to like classics and well-known popular movies, etc., and it's usually the ones with a much simpler story but very complex characters in comparison to a very intricate plot but with no character. And I think that's why fans have such an emotional attachment to Tim Burton films, because of the characters either created or adapted. But I'm going to go from the worst to best. So please note that this is my personal opinion, but I have had others voice their opinions to balance out my own bias. Obviously, I cannot mention every single character, but I'll cover as much as I can. But before we start, I do need to point out that I was meant to bring out all these rankings before the release of Beetlejuice, and unfortunately, I was unable due to the simple fact that I've just been busy, or I ended up wanting to write and make other videos that I really wanted to sink my teeth into. Therefore, from now on, I will be including Beetlejuice in the ranking. And so I will just quickly go into where they go on the ones that I've already uploaded. Unfortunately for music, it ends up at the very bottom at number 22, and that's mainly due to the fact that, much like Dark Shadows, it was overshadowed by the soundtrack, but unfortunately due to the fact that a lot of it was a variation of the original score. I think there's only one theme of music I remember, and that is Beetlejuice's Flashback, which was great. Story, I think it ranks at number 18 in between Alice in Wonderland and Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and it's mainly because there is a lot going on, and while I think it works for this kind of chaotic world, I can see why it would turn some people off, especially as the first film is simpler as a whole. So, with that said, let's dive into the characters. Enjoy. Starting with the worst characters in a Tim Burton film at number 22 is Planet of the Apes. And I think the reason why is because while I understand where these characters are coming from, it still doesn't make them interesting. And this particularly falls with Mark Wahlberg's character, Captain Leo Davison, who is the point of view coming into this, topsy-turvy world of apes taking the role of humans. Now, what I do appreciate is that I get his motivation, which is just trying to get the hell out of here, as let's be honest, I would be the same, and how he falls into his leadership with the human rebellion. But again, it doesn't make it that interesting, and I would argue the same with the other human characters. As I mentioned in the story, the apes and humans are sort of at that halfway point of the evolving or devolving, which I do find interesting in the acting perspective. But much like the original 1968 movie, I wasn't really a fan of the humans, and here is no exception. The apes are, of course, more fascinating in learning about the politics, religion, class system, etc. And at the center of it is Ori, played by Helena Bonham Carter, who is all for human rights. Again, a bit of a spin on someone who would fight for animal rights. But at the same time, she's the only one who sees Leo as different, and it parallels with him at the beginning of the film, who tries to prevent his chimpanzee to be used in a dangerous situation. Again, playing into the whole everything's being switched around. And before you say anything, I honestly do not believe that there was a romantic attachment. I believe it was strictly platonic, granted close, but platonic nonetheless. Then there's General Thade, played by Tim Roth, who showed more the violent, unhinged side of an ape with a clear hatred for humans, but a sense of fear from the possibility of an uprising. We see this from the discussion at the dinner party when he learns humans used to be... We learned this at the dinner party, and when he learns humans used to be superior, learning this from his dying father, cameoed by Charlton Heston. Then there's his second in command, Otta, played by Michael Clark Duncan, who I always see this dynamic similar to like Darth Vader and the Emperor, with the Emperor being Thade. I do find the more I watch this movie, I see Atta more interesting as he's very religious in the belief of Semos, known as the father of all apes. But as the movie goes on, we see how apes like Thade manipulate the beliefs to like suit their own personal gain, making Atta seem more of a villain. A villain? A victim, even. So, like I said, the apes are much more interesting, but the human characters do drag it down. Coming in at 21, we have definitely a colourful cast, but that is emphasis on the cast, and that is Mars Attacks. It is funny that still to this day, people are spellbound by the insane cast of this B-movie style sci-fi, but I think in some ways it's why it's so low on the list, because we think more about the actors and not necessarily the characters. To me, I laugh more of the fact that the events are happening to these actors and not the characters themselves. So, for example, yes, it's funny that a scientist who strongly believes that the Martians are completely innocent, but then is abducted and wakes up with his head severed and seeing his body parts separated. But the fact that it's Pierce Brosnan just makes it suddenly hilarious. Or the fact that Tom Jones can just randomly fly a plane, or the idea of Sarah Jessica Parker's head attached to a chihuahua. And of course, just the notion of Jack Nicholson being the president, as well as an upcoming hotel owner, almost doing an impression of himself. Sometimes just knowing that Natalie Portman, Glenn Close, Michael J. Fox, and Jack Black have been in a Tim Burton movie all at once, it's almost like the cast itself is a joke in of itself. Now, when it comes to the characters that I remember, it's mostly the more sympathetic ones, like Byron Williams, played by Jim Brown, and his family, as he's just trying to rebuild his life after being a boxer and like gone through a divorce. Meanwhile, his ex-wife is trying to deal with their kids, constantly skipping school. Then there's Richie, who's disrespected by his family, except from his grandmother. The reason why I think these characters are more memorable is because you actually want them to survive the invasion, whether you're just laughing at the rest of the cast, whether they live or they die. But of course, we cannot forget the real stars, which are the Martians. I love that we are not given an explanation as to why they attack. And for me, it depends on when I watch the movie. Sometimes I think that they are offended and therefore attack, or they're just massive trolls or something. It's a bit, or maybe it's a bit of both. But there's definitely one word to describe in them, and that's mischievous. So while I agree the cast is great, but it does overshadow the actual characters themselves, hence why it's this low on the list. At number 20, we have Dumbo, and while I appreciate that this is trying to be very different from the original 1941 animated feature, it does have a few shortfalls. Of course, it keeps the relationship between Dumbo and Mrs. Jumbo very loving, giving the same effect when she's imprisoned and even taken away in this version. I find Dumbo more curious in his surroundings, and I think it helps with seeing things from his perspective, the Dumbo lens, as they call it, and the trusty games from the children, Holt and Colette. One of my favorite elements was the parallel between Dumbo and Holt, played by Colin Farrell, with being looked at differently, with like Dumbo's big ears and Holt losing his arm in the war. They both have lost someone very close to them, Dumbo's mother and Holt's wife. However, the main difference is Dumbo is from the perspective of a child and Holt as a parent. I even love how this is shown visually, as both of them are having to dress up as clowns, and at the end, Holt is letting go of his fake arm as Dumbo is letting go of his dependence of a feather in order to fly. When it comes to the characters in the circus, it's more the ideas that they create rather than the characters themselves, seeing the difference between a very low-down but intimate group in comparison to the high-end Coney Island type theme park that seems quite cold and fake. This is definitely seen in the one in charge of Dreamland, Mr. Vanderveer, played by Michael Keaton, and his star A-list, Colette, played by Eva Green. Only the difference is Colette becomes more connected, showing an almost a maternal side to Dumbo and the kids, whereas Mr. becoming more delusional in making the impossible, putting others at risk, and even life-threatening. As far as Danny DeVito's ringmaster, he seemed too similar to his character in Big Fish, except uh, nearly falling under the influence of dreamland, but not too far that he ends up doing the right thing. Now, elephant in the room, and this is not Dumbo we're talking about, but let's talk about the kids. And everyone comments on the bad acting and how depressing and monotone they are. Now, I am not going to act like they are the best child actors I've seen, absolutely not, but hear me out. I do see them in the context of the story. Keep in mind that they are part of a traveling yet struggling circus. They have recently lost their mother, and their father has been away at war and comes back with a missing arm and no longer the star, but is now tending the elephants as his new job. Not to mention that Millie is not interested in performing, but wishes to pursue a career in science and gets nothing but an eye roll. I honestly cannot blame them for being down or having a lack of energy. However, I can see that this is not particularly interesting to watch. Let's just say I've seen much worse child characters in movies that seem more unrealistic. At least with these kids, I can see why they are like that. In all honesty, I remember the characters more from their appearance and the actors, as I was thinking more of the idea of that Burton was reuniting with Michael Keaton, Danny DeVito, and Alan Arkin, rather than the characters themselves. But considering that the main character was CGI, I was surprised by the amount that we got. It sort of reminded me of characters like Paddington or Dobby from Harry Potter, even though I know they're not really there, but they feel real. And I actually get the same with Dumbo. Coming in at number 19, we have Burton's previous film to Dumbo, which is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. And I think the reason why is because I did find myself wanting more, as there are a lot of characters. This is probably because there are a few sequels in the book, and trying to condense it into one movie, there's only so much that you can do within 2 hours. Much like Dumbo, it's more about the characters as a group and family, with the point of view from our lead, Jake, played by Aisha Butterfield, who doesn't fit in his Florida upbringing, but very close to his grandfather, a common theme in Burton's films, as he had a close relationship with his own grandmother. And then Jake coming across the peculiar children and is in awe of them, feeling inferior almost, but still feels like he belongs. It's something I related to, as for a very long time as a teenager, I just couldn't click with many people. It wasn't until the last couple of years in school that I found my group of outsiders, and we all supported each other, making the last few years just more bearable. What I like about the children is seeing how they live with their peculiarities, and it ties in with their personalities. Someone like Enoch is described as possessive, which makes sense as he brings inanimate objects to life, making them living puppets. Olive being sensitive and almost delicate, as she can create fire out of her bare hands, so she has to be careful. Emma making sure that she doesn't float away is probably the most quote-unquote grounded character, being almost the second command, but also following her separation from Abe. Then at the center of this home is Miss Peregrine, played by Eva Green, who I think had the perfect balance of showing her level of care and responsibility, but also her mysterious side. I always think of these two moments that I think sum up her character. One is when she turns her head to the children, staring down at them, showing like her scariness, and the other is when she is comforting Victor, showing her love for the children and her care. Mix that with her obsession with time and giving these bird-like behaviors linking to a peculiarity of an inbreed. When it comes to the villain, Samuel L. Jackson is of course a lot of fun, and you can definitely see it owning that distinct look, as well as noticing the times he ad-libs. While the motivations is a bit lame, craving immortality, the story, how they became hollows and trying to bring back their humanity by killing peculiar children and taking their eyes, makes it certainly more unique. Honestly, the best scenes for me is when you're just watching the lives of the home, such as the children playing in the garden, having dinner, watching movie time, uh, watching the reset of each day, because I like seeing how they live with their peculiarities and as a unit. And I can say the same thing about the first book as well. Before you say anything, I honestly had no problem with Emma and Olive switching their peculiarities for the film, as it makes sense visually. So, much like Dumbo, like them as a unit, but wanted a little bit more from each character. But again, I cannot blame the film, as there was a lot and limited time. Coming in at number 18, and this one I do feel bad how low it is, but there were other films with stronger characters in mind. But anyway, this is Frankenweenie. Now, this one is interesting because Burton has always described this film as a memory piece. As well as coming back to the original sketches, he suddenly remembered other kids from school, teachers from his childhood in Burbank, California, but most importantly, his relationship with his childhood dog. You instantly fall in love with Sparky and understand why a relationship with a pet is important for a child, as well as being their first experience with death. Victor plays on the idea of being the creative loner, making little stop motion Super 8 movies, much like a young Tim Burton, with his dad trying to get him to play baseball. If you didn't know, Burton's father worked at the Burbank baseball stadium. Keeping to the theme of The Outsider, I love how Victor is seen as the weird one, but all of his classmates has their own weirdness. I can certainly relate to that. Honestly, I believe it's the ideas and the origins of the characters that I find more interesting than the characters themselves, to the point that I made a whole video and the references to the original Universal monster movies, and maybe it's because we've seen characters like this in other Burton films that play on the same themes. But it was pretty fun seeing Burton unite with Catherine O'Hara, Martin Short, and Martin Landau, and again, having a good insight into his childhood. So I do really like the characters. There are more that I just find fascinating from his films. At number 17, we have Sleepy Hollow, and a lot of it has to do with the two leads, Ichabod Crane and Katrina Van Tassel. Johnny Depp took inspirations from the heroes from classic horror films, especially as this movie is a love letter to Hammer horror. Now, to be honest, I've only seen a handful of Hammer films, but after watching Peter Cushing playing Van Helsing, Dr. Frankenstein, and even Sherlock Holmes, I can see the similarities between them and Ichabod. Burton always described Constable Crane as someone who is very much in his own head, and the idea of going against a spirit with no head made it very funny. But going back to the Hammer horror heroes, what I could see was that they were very much in their careers or their projects. So like Van Helsing with his research on vampires, Frankenstein in creating his monster, and of course Sherlock Holmes with his case. And Ichabod certainly has that obsession in his investigation, and it kind of blindsides him. At the beginning, he believes that there's nothing supernatural involved, but as time goes on, we can see the effect, triggering nightmares of what happened to his mother. But what I particularly love about Ichabod is that he's very much into proper investigation and even autopsy at a time when it was frowned upon, but yet he is easily squeamish, looking at dead bodies, their insides, getting blood squirted on him, and even spiders. To me, that's where a lot of the humor comes from. The part that always cracks me up is when he and young Masbeth enters the witch's hovel and he uses the kid as a human shield. Now, unlike taking inspiration from Hammer horror, I feel like Katrina, played by Christina Ricci, is very different to the leading ladies from those films. Instead of a screaming damsel in distress, well, to an extent, she is not what she seems. She gives an image of someone from a fairy tale or a folk tale, but she's actually interested in the supernatural, which is a great contrast to Ichabod. And I think it's why I like their relationship as polar opposites joined together, learning from each other. So Katrina thinks more about the logical side, and Ichabod starts seeing the mystical side. However, when it comes to the other characters, mostly the town elders, I can't blame the film for it because it is a mystery, so not too much is meant to be shown about these characters until further down the line. The most we get is their reaction to Ichabod, making him more out of place. So while I think the main characters are great, I do feel the supporting characters do bring it down a bit. But having that said, the performances are also great, as so many legendary actors, including Michael Gough and Christopher Lee, being two big Hammer horror stars. At number 16, we have the long awaited sequel, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. And really, what this does, which is what most successful sequels do, is show the evolution of the original characters. In some ways, it does reflect on the idea that life throws things at you that you may not expect. And this all centers around Lydia Dietz, played by Winona Ryder. I honestly didn't think where I thought she would be with her life. I always thought that maybe she'd like have a career in photography, but as I said, life happens, and so we're introduced to the fact that she's now she hosts a ghost hunt type show. Being managed by her boyfriend using her gift of seeing the dead. At first, I was like, fair enough about the TV show, but questioned her choice of boyfriend, Roy, played by Justin Theroux, who is purposely annoying. It makes me think of like a 2020s version of Otho from the first film, but when you learn about her separating from her ex-husband and then him dying, causing a rift between her and her daughter, it makes more sense. I love the idea that things can happen and maybe not as you planned, and sometimes you may lose yourself. In this movie, Lydia is sort of finding herself again. As Delia says, where's the obnoxious goth girl that tormented me? It's time to find her again. Speaking of Delia Dietz, played by Catherine O'Hara, the fact that she's moved from sculpting to performance art makes perfect sense. And she had the most laughs alongside Beetlejuice. And thank goodness Beetlejuice's screen time was limited, and so the few times he's on screen makes it all the better. Honestly, when I saw Michael Keaton in the costume, the makeup with the voice and the mannerisms, it was almost scary how much he just went right back into character. However, we are actually given a backstory with his ex-wife and death, and it fits so well with his character. Now, with this sequel, there are, of course, new characters, but I think the one that stood out was Lydia's daughter, Astrid, played by Jenna Ortega. I was worried that she was going to be a carbon copy of Lydia, but thankfully she has her own way of being an outsider teenager. You can see the effect the death of her father had on her, as she seems a bit more bitter and cynical, so I think it makes sense that she doesn't get on with her mom, who can like speak to the ghosts, but can never speak to her dad. As far as the other new characters, I do enjoy them, but I feel like we didn't get enough. I wanted to see more of Willem Dafoe's dead actor turned inspector in the afterlife, as he treats everything like he's in a movie. As I said, Roy can be a little irritating, but that's on purpose. And as far as Beetlejuice's ex-wife, played by Monica Bellucci, love her design. Her intro scene was fantastic, but I'm split because, yes, she does disappear for a good chunk of the movie, but I feel like if we did get more, it might be too much. I do love that she's the only thing that Beetlejuice is actually afraid of, so I feel like she's a character to react to, not to delve into, if that makes sense. So, adore seeing the original characters and where they've ended up, but wanted more from the new. Also, shout out to Bob. Bob is great. Coming in at number 15, we have Wednesday. Now, obviously, this is based on season 1, although by the time I finish these rankings, season 2 would have come out. But anyway, there's a lot to get through. Wednesday Addams has always been a favorite of mine, including the original black and white show, Christina Ricci, and I even think that she was the best part in the animated films, or at least compared to the rest of those movies. But I must admit that she's always been one that has like short quips. It makes sense because we are trying to focus on an entire family. So when it came to Wednesday season 1, it was finally like, oh yes, we're finally going to explore her a lot more. Jenna Ortega was phenomenal in the comedy, being the dark, gloomy, sadistic daughter of the Addams family. But it was interesting, like, to see her use her intelligence to solve this like ongoing case throughout the season. However, what was new was seeing her not necessarily becoming vulnerable, but learning how to navigate through social situations. But I loved seeing her relationship with her family, particularly Morticia, feeling that she's like living in her shadow. And to me, it makes perfect to me, it makes sense, as like Morticia and Gomez are more positive in their love of the macabre, even Pugsley and Uncle Fester. Whereas Wednesday is more cynical, and as she's a teenager, there's that rebellion and not wanting to become her parents, but also against doing the so-called normal high school events, uh, becoming the outsider in a school full of outcasts. You know, how ironic. And that's what I find interesting in Nevermore as a whole. And it does bring up a good point. You know, sometimes when you're among people who seem like you can still feel different. And I think a lot of the students go through that in their own way. Enid, Wednesday's girly, energetic roommate, but we see her insecurities from her home life pressuring her to wolf out. Bianca, I know a lot of people just remember her as Wednesday's rival, but again, we see her insecurities and wanting to make a new life for herself. It's almost like she feels threatened by Wednesday, but as the season goes on, we see the two almost like see each other and I guess like tolerate each other. We see this from the headmistress, played by Gwendola Christie, who almost reminds me of Miss Peregrine, where she would protect the school at all costs, but sometimes it may not be via the best intentions. We also see her jealousy of Morticia as they were roommates at Nevermore. Of course, Morticia and Gomez are brilliant, being like so romantic with each other, but filmed in a way that you can see it from Wednesday's point of view. However, my two favorite characters are actually Eugene, who is simply adorable, and of course, Thing. I knew going in, knowing that Burton loves to keep things as practical as possible, that Thing was going to be played by an actor, like crawling on the floor, etc. And with that, there is so much personality from this one hand. There's one scene that always makes me laugh, when like Thing is mad at Wednesday and he's just flipping through pages of a magazine giving that like, oh yeah, I'm just casually reading, no, I'm not angry but I'm fuming like vibe. But there's something about it coming from a disembodied hand that just makes it hilarious to me. Honestly, where it does fall flat are the two love interests, Tyler and Xavier, just because they're just kind of moody simps for Wednesday. But to be honest, I think season 2 might be more interesting for Tyler's character. If you know, you know. And Xavier's not in it anymore, thank God. Also, it was cool to see Christina Ricci, not only in an Addams Family project, but also working again with Tim Burton since Sleepy Hollow. Honestly, I think overall the characters are great, especially the Addams Family, and I'm excited for season 2, as it looks like we'll see more of them. At number 14, I kind of wanted to put this one higher, but I admit there were more characters in other films that are more memorable that I kept pushing this one down. But anyway, we have Big Fish, definitely an emotional film. With that said, there are plenty of colourful characters that Edward Bloom tells in his stories. Usually the first story I think of, and therefore the characters, when I think of Big Fish, is the circus, and it's mostly due to Danny DeVito as Calloway, the ringmaster. Let's not forget that this was the first collaboration Burton had with Deep Roy. I think what makes Calloway stand out compared to DeVito's role in Dumbo is that he kind of trolls Edward to keep him employed for free. If you remember, Edward is wanting information from Calloway about the girl that will eventually be his wife, but Calloway only gives information once a month. And it is the most basic, generic facts like she's going to college, or she likes music, not even giving him what college she's going to or what type of music she's into, and Edward totally falls for it. But at the same time, we find out the more sensitive side of Calloway, given his secret. I won't give it away. Then there's Carl the giant, who is naive but not stupid, as he is able to read the lines. There's the witch, who can show you how you are going to die and has a strange connection to Jenny Hill, both played by Helena Bonham Carter. If you know, you know. What I find interesting about Jenny is how you can see that fantasy that she has of Edward, in that she married someone the same age gap and realized it was a mistake, and when she does try with Edward, it's too late. So while many just see her as the attempted mistress, I do see her as a tragedy. We've got the twins, and the poet Norther Winslow, who Edward helps become successors, but we mustn't forget the core relationships, which is Edward and Sandra Bloom and their son William. In the stories, Edward and Sandra are very charming and romanticized, while in the present they just have like these little moments, like sharing that essence of magic that it makes sense why they were right for each other years later. I don't know, there's something about older couples I admire, and maybe it's remembering my own grandparents. But the most important relationship is between Edward and Will, who are estranged from each other, and the whole story evolves around them. I must admit, when I was younger, I usually sided with Edward, probably because his stories were great and a part of me wanted to believe them. But as I grow older, I do see from William's point of view as it's hard to know what to believe. And when it's coming from your own parent, it is frustrating. It's that realization that you may not know who your parents like really are, or you might not know who your parents really are as people, or thinking that they are not who they say they are. And you almost see that sort of fear from Will as he's about to become a father himself, and he's afraid that he's going to make the same quote unquote mistakes that his father made to him growing up. I'll probably won't go into. I'll probably go more into this when we get to the ending category, but I think what makes the main characters so great is the grounded emotions they provided, that there's something everyone can relate to in this movie. But throw in, as I said, very colourful, interesting characters. It balances out between the drama and the humour that makes Big Fish such an adventure into one person's life. At number 13, we're going from more grounded characters to crazy and wacky with Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Of course, Pee-wee Herman, played by Paul Reubens, was an already established character, and to be honest, I haven't seen his original show, but when I watched the movie, I already got an idea straight away of who he was. Pee-wee Herman is a child stuck in a man's body, but unlike most of these characters where the humor comes from, how odd they are in mundane environments, the supporting cast in Big Adventure oddly embraces him and gives it a sense of humor that strangely works. Like, he's a character that both kids and adults can laugh with and go along for the ride. I remember the first time I watched this movie in the middle of the night, at boarding school, so I was watching it on my phone under my covers, and just by watching Pee-wee get up in the morning and make breakfast, I felt so energetic and I just wanted to keep watching. But when you start meeting his neighbors that are either just as childish like him, like Francis, and I would even argue Dottie to an extent, or just go along with whatever he's doing, it was quick to pick up what sort of world I was in for, and much like them, I went, okay, let's do it. I think a big part of what made Pee-wee's Big Adventure more memorable than his other two movies, Big Top Pee-wee and Pee-wee's Big Holiday, is the supporting characters stand out just as much as him. I instantly remember the escaped convict Mickey, Simone dreaming of going to Paris, her awful boyfriend Andy, the bikers, the tour guide at the Alamo, the spoiled child actor, and of course, Large Marge. Going through the list of characters, it sounds so odd on paper, but all of them are so entertaining in their own way, whether they're trying to be funny, sensitive, or even scary. They all leave their mark. Honestly, just thinking about them, it kind of makes me want to go and watch it again, just to be alongside them. They're just that fun to watch, and I don't think much else needs to be said. But I must admit that Pee-wee does need to take a back seat to these characters, who are even crazier but balances it out with grounded ones. You may have guessed it, but at number 12 we have Beetlejuice. Now, I think the best word to describe the movie is improvisation, and I mean that in the best way. A lot of this movie was improvised, and this came to most of the characters as well, and I thank God it was because These actors, along with the visuals, make this movie. Michael Keaton and Tim Burton were still trying to figure out like what Beetlejuice like was, and something just came out when the makeup went on, putting the costume, and it's just electrifying. The energy, the voice, the delivery. If any of these elements changed, it wouldn't be the same. I always see Beetlejuice as a character that allows audiences to embrace their dark side, and I think his limited screen time really makes every scene he's in more special. Um, in order to come back from the insanity that is Beetlejuice is Lydia Dietz, played by Winona Ryder, who is seen as strange due to her goth status, but she's able to see the ghosts, and at the end of the day, someone who's just lonely and feels out of place, but she also has, creativity in her photography. Lydia really is the most real, and yet everyone treats her as weird because she dresses in black and is interested in the macabre, but the others around her seem weirder. Delia, her stepmom, played by Catherine O'Hara, has her own unique style in her sculptures and very high maintenance. And much like Michael Keaton, a lot of this was improvised, and therefore so much energy comes out in her own unique way. Charles Dietz is just trying to relax, but then somehow wanting to make a business deal, being wrapped up in the insanity, which is his new wife. Otho claiming to just be experts at everything that comes along and is so prideful. So working off Delia just makes the duo really funny. Now, I know a lot of people have issues with the real two main characters, which are Adam and Barbara Maitland, played by Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, in that they are too plain and therefore boring. My argument is that they are meant to be mundane, as they are the point of view characters into the crazy world of the afterlife. They're just trying to get through the complicated rules of being dead, but are stuck with people who are not like them, trying to take over their house, and then to deal with this like demon bio exorcist. I think if they weren't good as a couple and the chemistry wasn't there, it wouldn't have worked as well. But you do believe them as a married couple and trying to support each other, navigating through the sudden realization that they're dead. I think this movie had such a great balance between the ones that you relate to and the ones that you just kind of go along with the madness. Think about the two most popular characters in this movie. One is the most insane, and the other is the most grounded, and I think that kind of proves my point. Coming in at number 11, and I really wanted to put this in the top 10, but I had to be real with myself as there were better characters. But just missing it, we have Dark Shadows, and I think a big point to make is that it really helps when this movie came out. Being in an all-girls boarding school, I was in the midst of the whole Twilight saga, and it was just hell. I just remember just wanting a proper vampire movie with a real classic vampire. Well, thanks to Tim Burton, I saw that he was doing his own vampire movie, and I was watching the trailer on loop, over and over again. I was so hyped. Johnny Depp looked like a classic, gothic, elegant vampire. But the spin was that Barnabas Collins is a reluctant vampire. Instead, he's this sophisticated, hopeless romantic who values his family legacy, and yet he is cursed as a vampire and comes back to 1972. Again, just the idea alone, I've already said, just sounded hilarious, and the mannerisms that Depp has and his formal way of speaking just clashes with everyone else. It just adds to the humour. Now, a lot of this was taking inspiration from the original soap opera show, and I can tell Michelle Pfeiffer took this inspiration for her role as Elizabeth, pretty much the head of the family, who, much like Barnabas, cares greatly about her family, and she's very stern and she's no nonsense kind of matriarch, but she clearly has the typical parent relationship with her teenage daughter, Carolyn, played by Chloe Grace Montez, who just wants to run away, become a hippie, wants nothing to do with her family. And so, she sees Barnabas as like, she's really the one who mostly sees him as weird and an annoyance. David, the other kid in the family, however, admires Barnabas, and this is probably due to the fact that he is also seen as weird, as he believes he sees the ghost of his dead mother and craves attention from his father Roger, played by Johnny Lee Miller, who is just this player who wants to mooch the Collins riches. The extra member of the family is Dr. Julia Hoffman, played by Helena Bonham Carter, who has come to Collinwood to be David's psychiatrist, but clearly isn't that good, as she's been living there for years and is an alcoholic. And as a doctor, she becomes interested in Barnabas as a vampire and tries to work with him to maybe cure him. I always saw like this bit of tragedy to Julia, as she kind of fears growing older, and I think that's also what sort of attracts her to Barnabas, like that sort of immortality and looking young and beautiful forever. But the one who has Barnabas's eye is Victoria Winters, who is the newly employed governess for David, and this is due to her resembling Barnabas's lost love, Josette. She's pretty much the quiet, internal member of the household, but this is due to her own backstory with her own parents, and it has a connection with Josette. So she finds herself also drawn to Barnabas, like some sort of weird like connection through time. It's I'll probably get to it in when we talk about the endings, but maybe she's not quite as obsessed as Angelique Bouchard, played by Eva Green, who, I'm not gonna lie, is one of my favourite characters ever. Angelique takes the idea of the crazy ex-girlfriend to a whole new level. She kills Barnabas's current girlfriend, curses him to be a vampire, has an angry mob come after him to lock him in a coffin where he only escapes after 200 years, and she does even more to break down the Collins family in many ways that, again, I won't spoil. So, is she crazy? Yes, but she is someone not to mess with. But that's part of what I love about her at the same time. Like, it's almost like there's a tragedy to her, as she's convinced that Barnabas loves her, but it's not love that she has for him. It's more of like a possession, like wanting to own everything about him. And so whenever Barnabas and Angelique are in the same room together, you don't know if they're going to kill each other or just devour each other. And there's just such this great, like, sexual tension that just makes it so funny to me. Again, I really wanted to put this movie in the top 10 for the characters, but I do realise that the Collins are hiding their own secret. So it's sort of like in the same realm of Sleepy Hollow, we don't get a full idea until the end. But then again, it's their reaction to Barnabas and those snippets of this family dynamic that is funny but strangely relatable. You know, it goes to show that every family is dysfunctional. It's just this one has a vampire. What's not entertaining about that? And I mean a proper vampire. Okay, guys, we have now reached the top 10, and coming in at number 10, we have a different kind of afterlife compared to something like Beetlejuice. We have Corpse Bride. Every time I think of this movie, I always remember the first time I watched it and how it completely took me by surprise in not just the look, themes, music, but the characters. This is really one of the few movies I've seen with a love triangle where all three are equal. And I think it's due to the fact that they're simply just looking for, you know, love and a connection. There's no hidden agenda or anyone who's going to treat anyone badly. All three are flawed, yes, but it's due to either their upbringing, events that lead them to where they are, or the situation they're currently in. Victor and Victoria are in an arranged marriage, but they actually hit it off, and they're both very sweet despite having not the best parents in the world. But then Victor accidentally, you know, finds himself in the land of the dead with Emily, the corpse bride. We do understand, you know, why he wants to get back, but we start seeing Emily's personality, which is very free-spirited, but sadly she was robbed of her chance of love in death, and so you see this tragic side to her and understand why she's so excited to have Victor, appear, even if it's just the idea of love that she's more into rather than Victor himself. But as time goes on, they start having this connection that, as a first time watcher, I honestly didn't know where it was going. Honestly, this love triangle works so well that I did a whole video on it. But it's not just the three lovers, but we also have the supporting roles. The parents from both sides reflect the themes of classification, making the land of the living feel more pressured in societal expectations, that it feels more dead than the land of the dead, ironically. Victor's parents, while excited for the marriage, mostly for their own reasons, for like climbing the social ladder, but yet they have absolutely no faith in their son at all. Victoria's parents, on the other hand, are miserable, well, more than usual, about this marriage. But once again, it's all for their personal gain to use their daughter to avoid the workhouse as a result from squandering their riches. Even though there is a lot of comedy from the parents, it explains why Victor and Victoria are very naive, sheltered, and internal. Now, on the flip side, the Land of the Dead is full of colourful characters that make the world just a party atmosphere, to the point that even telling Emily's sad backstory is in an upbeat, jazzy type of song. Like, you could argue the Dead are more background characters, but like Pee-wee, they're just so recognisable. Like, I remember Bonejangles being the lead man of the parties, the cooks and Paul, the literal head waiter, the dog Scraps being reunited with Victor, which was so adorable, the maggot sounding like Peter Lorre, being a sort of Jiminy Cricket to Emily, and Elder Goodneck to this like ancient looking skeleton who's like into alchemy and sorcery and a lot of reading. Once again, the irony of this film is how the Land of the Dead feels more alive, and it's to do with the characters as well as the visuals, but it makes you look at death in a different point of view, as well as life, and just that simple act of just wanting a connection and love that our main characters bring. It really is a good example of don't judge a book by its cover, as it first looks like a Halloween comedy, but yet the characters make you think so differently that at the end of the day, it's just a very sweet little love story with a bit of death thrown in. Well, wouldn't you know it, we've got another stop motion film straight after Corpse Bride, and so at number 9 is The Nightmare Before Christmas. There was no doubt that this was going to be in the top 10 just from the main character, the Pumpkin King himself, Jack Skellington. Oh my god, where do I start with him? Well, I think we can all agree that we've been in a similar situation as him, i.e. feeling this sense of repetitiveness, getting tired of doing the same thing. I think there's always been this phase we go through where even in things we love and have a passion for, we do go through that sense of possibly boredom or non-fulfillment or whatever. And then when he discovers Christmas Town during the song What's This, I always see it as though it's like a kid discovering Christmas. It's so overwhelming with all the lights, the decorations, the music, the presents, etc. But it has the same feeling of what it's like discovering new things in life. It gives us this energy. I definitely went through that when I discovered the films of Tim Burton, and on top of that his artwork, etc. I was like, I need to see everything this guy does. I want more, and it just opens so many doors to like other works like Universal horror, Hammer horror, German expressionistic silent films, so much more. Like, I already loved movies, but I think thanks to Tim Burton, it revived and made me see movies in a whole new way. So I relate to Jack in that way. I wonder if any of you have any moments that you can relate with Jack. Now, I know the idea behind the actual Nightmare Before Christmas was this idea of taking the Grinch, but turning it around so Jack wanted to celebrate Christmas, but was doing it not quite the right way. And I think this is what makes him so likable, is his blind optimism. He could have been so easily seen as a villain or like an anti-hero, but instead, because we see his passion in what he's doing, even though everyone is terrified, we love how happy he is, and we'll see this in another character in a movie to come on this list. Not to mention, I love Zero, his ghost dog, much like a lot of Burton's dogs on screen. Zero has just this utmost loyalty and is always there for him. But of course, we can't forget to mention Sally, who is this sort of Frankenstein doll-like creation who has a crush on Jack, but is very much the grounded character. From the moment we see her watching Jack sing his lament in the graveyard, we instantly can see that she is the only one who like truly understands him. You know, the Halloween Town residents admire and worship Jack as their king, but Sally really sees Jack Skellington behind the Pumpkin King. So it makes sense that she's the only one who can have that idea of who can see that idea of taking over Christmas is not a good thing. That's not going to go well. Not to mention that she's very intelligent. She's able to run away numerous times from her creator, Dr. Finkelstein, and was sort of mirroring how the creation can outsmart their creator, tries to find ways to stop Jack from going ahead with Christmas, and tries to save Santa in the climax. Even though they're not on screen together that much, you really want Jack to see Sally the way she sees him. So when the ending comes, honestly, I adore them as a couple, absolutely adore them. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Oogie Boogie, who's quite a unique villain due to his gambling addiction, making his lair seem like it can belong to a Bond villain. But I do like that they keep him in the shadows, a mystery on who he is. I've always interpreted him as someone who like took Halloween too far, maybe even caused harm. So like Jack had him locked away because he never leaves his lair, and the trick-or-treaters sort of guard him, I say? Well, I say guard because Lock, Shock and Barrel become more of like Oogie's henchmen, and they're of course a little tricksters. Honestly, when it comes to the other residents of Halloween, it's more from their designs that stand out, but we'll get to that in another ranking. But the main characters are just instantly likable, relatable, and you just love being around them. Absolutely love them. Now, I really had to argue my way through to get this film as high as it is, or at least get it into the top 10, and maybe some of you may agree or disagree, but I'll try to explain. And number 8, we have Big Eyes. And while you could make the argument the film centers around two characters, but my goodness, what two amazing characters to look at. Even to this day, I still cannot believe this was based on a true story and what Margaret Keane went through. But this is what I find so inspiring about her. We've been in a period of time where films have been pushing for strong female characters, where they can do no wrong and they're in charge, etc., etc. But as many people have pointed out, myself included, is that they are some of the most boring characters. And for me personally, I feel this way is because they have no flaws, or at least none that's brought to attention, and therefore nothing is learned, nothing is gained, nothing is resolved. There's nothing human about them. I say this because to me, Margaret Keane is a feminist icon, but in such a non-conventional way, in that she is so internal and so private. Even when you watch her in interviews, she's very quiet and she doesn't explain herself very much, but you can tell she loves doing what she does, which is painting. It's what she lives for. And Amy Adams brought that to her performance, and it was so incredible. She only has to give a look and the emotions are all there in her eyes. I think about when she discovers Walter has taken credit for her paintings, when she's trying a new style so she can put her name on something, when she finds out more information about Walter, it's all in her eyes. And I think that was so important. As you know, the film is called Big Eyes and the paintings are all about the eyes. So having an actor that can really communicate through them was vital to make this work. But what I love about Margaret is that despite her shyness, she is strong. And we see it in moments of the film. So when she does finally tell the truth after all these years, it feels so much more triumphant, even though it's on a smaller scale. We see these moments even at the very beginning when she leaves her first husband, despite being, very frowned upon in that time period, but being able to leave and start a new life for her and her daughter. When she finds out more about Walter, and I'll get to the scene in a bit, but afterwards she separates him in the house, and you can see she's taken a little bit of control as well, trying to find a new style of painting to work with so that she can have something to give herself credit for. And we can see that she never sees herself as a victim for what happened, as she admits that she did go along with the lie, and she even states that if it wasn't for Walter, her paintings wouldn't have had any attention. But being able to find a way to cope with the situation and finally having the courage to start again, but finally tell the truth, going to court, getting her justice, to me, that's more inspirational in comparison to what I was saying about Hollywood's idea of a strong female character. Now, on the other hand, we have Walter Keane, played by Christoph Waltz, and he brings a different energy. But what I love about how he was written and acted was he wasn't a straight up bad guy. I feel like any other director, any other writer would have made him two-dimensional villain with no redeeming qualities. But Burton's Scott and Alexander found that balance to show he is a flawed human. Christoph Waltz managed to make him charming, that you can see why Margaret married him in the first place, but seeing his gradual descent, but again, not making it too villainous. Best example, and why it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, is when Margaret finds out that his original paintings of Paris was indeed painted by someone else. And so she realizes that he has never painted, and she confronts him about it. Not only does this show Margaret's hidden power that she has, but it shows Walter's tragic sides. As you can see, he really did want to be a painter. It just didn't turn out well, opening this door to this frustration and desperation. And so he just turned to desperate measures. We also see this in his delusion throughout the course of the film, where he actually starts believing that he truly is the painter. Well, yes, you can easily get angry from this mindset, but as these paintings were gaining more and more recognition, you can see why he would fall into this idea, getting all this attention and coming up with these stories. He was just lost in all the lies, and I do honestly see the tragedy in it a bit, but at the same time he's able to show the sinister, controlling, bullying side to him. So while the supporting characters are not much, they're mostly there to react to the artwork, but these two main characters, from the writing, the direction, the acting, it's honestly incredible and should not be overlooked. So going from real life to something very fantastical. In fact, some of the most famous fantasy characters from literature brought to the screen. At number 7, we have Alice in Wonderland. Well, what's fascinating about these characters is that even if you have never seen a film based on Alice or read the books, you just know them. When you hear Mad as a Hatter or Cheshire Cat's Grin going down the rabbit hole, you know instantly who others referring to, where it's from, the imagery. They are just so iconic. But what I find so amazing about Burton's version of these characters is that they feel the most human. The levels of madness are explored. I think back to other versions of Alice films. While the character designs stick out, their personalities do kind of blend into each other, into just fun, crazy, with that bit of edge to it. And when you go from one to another, it does kind of become a little bit grating. The way these characters are portrayed in Burton's adaptation are far more distinctive and give such new life to them, hence why I believe they deserve to be in the top 10. I remember watching this movie for the first time in cinemas and thinking, I have never seen the Hatter this interesting, or the Cheshire Cat, or the Tweedles. And it really brought me back to the original books and enjoying being with them while still having this sinister vibe that Wonderland has. Johnny Depp played the Hatter like a human mood ring with different personalities that can just turn on a dime. I can tell he took inspiration from real-life hatters from the Victorian times, that he suffered from mercury poisoning, hence why it became a phrase. And I mostly see this in the way his eyes are dotting around.
with so much going on through his head, but being able to soften at like important moments, mostly when he's talking directly to Alice. This stems from his backstory of what happened to his family caused by the Red Queen, giving him a darker tone in comparison to other interpretations of the character. But I love his interactions with Alice. They sort of have like this close sibling type relationship, and they tell things that each other needs to hear in ways that they would understand. When it comes to the Red Queen, some people have pointed out that she is very much like the Queen of Hearts as well. Now, just to clarify, the Queen of Hearts and the Red Queen are two separate characters in the book. However, as the Queen of Hearts is short-tempered, mostly shouting off your heads, and the Red Queen is more like a spoiled child, a lot of Alice movies combine the two personalities. In this version, played by Helena Bonham Carter, was no exception. She has her outbursts, obsession with decapitation, speaks like a toddler, lisp included, and in such a commanding tone. Fun fact, she was actually inspired by hers and Burton's daughter at the time. But you can see at the end of the day, she's quite lonely. So once again, the obvious villain is just not bad, full stop. We see her insecurities from having an abnormally large head that surrounds herself with others who have large features like ears, noses, bellies, etc. But it's kind of sad when she realizes they were fakes. It's that misfortune that she just doesn't understand how to make people love her, that she leans towards fear in comparison to her sister, the White Queen, played by Anne Hathaway. She's pretty much the extreme opposite to the Red Queen, refusing to harm any living creature instead of just using them for furniture. She moves very gracefully, as though she's floating, and it's very airy, and it reminds me a bit of Snow White a little bit. However, there is a slight edge to her, as though her airiness is like burying that deepness, like that darkness deep down. And then when it comes to the voice work, brilliant. Stephen Fry as the Cheshire Cat. He sounds like a cat, and you can see him grinning behind the microphone. We've got Alan Rickman. Oh my goodness, as the Caterpillar. As soon as I saw that casting, I was like, perfect. His voice goes so well with that character. Matt Lucas as the Tweedles, they're just like naughty little school children, little Victorian children, and they have their few laughs. He has their few laughs, he's just duplicated. But the other reason why I believe that this film is as high on the list as it is because of Alice herself. Other versions, while they may be likeable, Alice is mainly there to be a point of view character. But when I read the books, I find that she almost fits into the world of Wonderland herself. She might not be as mad as the residents, but you can tell she would imagine these characters, as her mind does sort of, for lack of a better word, wanders. And this film really explores her character, not just that, but explores the themes of growing up, and as you enter into the adult world, you lose that childlike imagination, as well as being a teenager and being treated like a child, but then an adult. And Mia Wasikowska managed to capture the balance between the two. I was honestly so impressed by how they handled Alice as a character that I made a whole video about it, and honestly, it is my personal favourite video I've made to this day. These characters really made Wonderland feel more alive and explored more than just being mad, but still feeling like the original characters. In fact, when I lent my books to one of my close friends who had never read them, but had seen a few Alice movies, they confirmed that as they were reading them, they imagined the Tim Burton characters. Enough said. Now, I was actually stuck between Alice and this movie, but this one had a little edge. So at number 6, we have Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I think the reason is, while Alice managed to really give more distinct personalities, Charlie really stayed true to the source material, but added even more dimension from the already interesting characters. Okay, let's start off with, we got a lot of characters to go through, but let's go through it. Let's start off with the quote, bad children, as an example. Yes, Augustus Gloop is a gluttonous boy. But they took that to the next level, to the point that he bites into his chocolate bar without looking, let alone seeing that he's won a golden ticket. Veruca Salt is extremely spoilt, but instead of being a screaming toddler about it, she plays it more stern, as though no doesn't even register to her. And she like plays like this whole like, oh, I'm daddy's little girl. And so she like manipulates her dad to get what she wants. Violet Beauregard, instead of just being a rude, obsessive gum chewer, she's like turned into like this huge competitor, believing being number one is like the only thing that matters. Mike TV goes from just obsessed with TV, becomes more aggressive with no respect to anyone, as though he uses the TV to shut off anything while that's real. What I really like about The Bad Children is that you can see that it really stems from the parents. You know, Mrs. Gloop praises her son. Mr. Salt has difficulty saying no. Mrs. Beauregard pressures her daughter in competing, mostly to compensate her own lack of achievement. And Mr. TV is extremely distant from his son, so it's like he's letting the TV just be like his full-time babysitter. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have Charlie Bucket and his family, while extremely poor, are loving and supportive of each other. And I know a lot of people have made the argument that Charlie, played by Freddie Highmore, seems a bit too perfect. Now, I would actually make the argument in that he... How do I explain this? Because he's so used to basically, he's so used to not having anything. He's had a life where he's known nothing but eating cabbage soup all the time, and living in this, shed, and maybe not even that. I think it's that idea of being used to not getting anything. And I think so when he doesn't get the ticket the first time round, it's almost like, okay, it's sort of like, almost like that sort of, he's used to it, but again, it's that kindness and that support with him and his family, and, again, it's that love for his family that makes the climax different. Obviously, we'll get to that when we get to the endings rankings. So I really love that dynamic. I love his relationship with Grandpa Joe. As Joe is telling him stories about Willy Wonka, it just reminds me of when my grandparents would be telling me about what they were doing when they were growing up, and their first job and all that sort of thing. It gives that same vibe. And then, of course, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Willy Wonka, played by Johnny Depp. And okay. I'm going to say it. I honestly don't get why people have such a problem with his performance. I think it is Willy Wonka as a character, and maybe because he is so unhinged that it rubs people the wrong way. But I'm sorry to tell you this, guys, that is the character. Like, I always saw Willy Wonka as this very mysterious, very sort of, I don't want to say reserved, but like sort of, he is a guy who has spent years in isolation surrounded by Oompa Loompas. That'll do things to your brain. And like showing that, and like his lack of social cues, and almost like he sort of has this like weird, he doesn't like children. It's like he doesn't know how to be around, he doesn't even know how to be around people. And I love how a little bit of this is explained with his backstory. I honestly had no problem with the backstory whatsoever. I think it gives a little window into why he is the way he is, but they don't show too much. And I think they just found the right amount, but to make it different to work for a movie. And I think it really adds to, I think it really parallels him more with Charlie. Well, not parallels him, that's the wrong word, but sort of gives him and Charlie a bit of a connection because they're so opposite, with Wonka, not having that family around him, and Charlie, and then Charlie having his family, even though having nothing. I think it gives them a bit of a stronger bond in a weird way. So yes, I will say that, as I said, it stays true to the book, but I think it adds so much more character to, I think, everyone. I think they feel very, very fleshed out. And I think for that, it deserves to be in the top 10. Okay, so now we're in the top 5. Okay, I'm wondering if any of you guys are guessing what's coming up next. So, at number 5, we have Batman. And boy, a lot of this is probably what I might be just repeating myself, but here we go. So, as I said, I wasn't really huge into superhero movies, but Batman 89 completely turned that around because, oh, I just don't know. It's like it just clicked to me why Batman is seen as so fascinating. Honestly, you could write so much about these characters. Okay, I don't even know where to start off. I mean, I suppose the best way to start off with is let's have a look at Batman himself. And I think the key in what makes Michael Keaton's Batman, and a lot of people argue he's still the best one to this day, I agree, is because he knew that he needed to figure out who Bruce Wayne was in order to get Batman down. And I think he just does that balance so well between the two. Like with Bruce Wayne, they made him very, 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 very private, very much to himself. But even in his own house, there's that great moment where he's like, he's having his dinner date with Vicky Vale, and he's just like, come to think of it, I've never actually eaten in here before. And it's just like, and then as Vicky says, some parts of this house, oh, no, it was Bruce Wayne who says it, some parts of this house is very much like me, some of it is not. And it's like he can't figure himself out. And it's so wrapped up in the very first moment you meet him when, it's like, oh, hi, do you know who Bruce Wayne is? And he's like, well, I'm not sure. That's basically him in a nutshell. It's just that one interaction, and we've not even properly met him yet. I mean, it's brilliant. And then when it comes to Batman, he was the one who invented the whole idea of disguising his voice, which is great. And, Keaton manages to do that, make those expressions within his eyes. I mean, he manages to sort of have that sort of unhinged quality that Batman has always had. Yes, he's a hero, but he's a guy who dresses up as a bat. Yes, say that out loud, and it's weird, and it's like, yeah, it's like he sort of kind of knows, yes, this is weird, this is strange what I'm doing, but I have to do it, and you get that sense within him, and I've just not seen any other interpretation like that, and that's what so intrigues me. Every time I rewatch this movie, it's just, oh my god, it was just so good. And on the other side of the spectrum is, of course, the Joker, played by Jack Nicholson. And, okay, so this is kind of interesting because, I feel like the Joker can be played in so many different ways. I've definitely seen good, I've definitely seen bad. Jared Leto. But what's interesting about Jack Nicholson's portrayal is that a lot of people can basically sum up the Joker as, the clown prince of crime, he spreads anarchy, and yeah, I think that's it. I think Jack Nicholson is anarchy, and I think he plays that sort of, you have no idea what's going to come out of his head. I don't think he does, because he goes all over the place. Now, some people could say, well, isn't that like kind of a short, but that's the character. And you're just kind of going for the ride because he's having so much fun with it, even though he's doing very horrible things. But because he's laughing at it so much, it's kind of strangely infectious. I don't know why. It's like, even though it's very dark and morbid, I find myself laughing at it because of how much he's laughing at it. He makes it very, very infectious, and I think Jack Nicholson does that so well. And he's able to work through that makeup with that permanent smile, so much, like I said, with the eyes. So even when he looks like, it's like, do I look like I'm joking? It's like, ooh, you can see it in the eyes. He's gonna kill you. So I really, really love that. But then, okay, so obviously you've got the two main characters, and I know a lot of people say that, too much attention was brought on the Joker, not enough, was on Batman. Firstly, that's not the only version that's done that. I think Heath Ledger had much more of a spotlight than Christian Bale did in The Dark Knight. I'm just saying, so it's not anything new. But much like The Dark Knight, Batman kind of knew this. They knew that the Joker is much more out there and in your face, while Batman is much more in the shadows. Those are the characters. So I never saw a problem with this. And I think even with the supporting characters, Vicky Vale, I think she's able to sort of ground the film into a little bit of reality. Because there's a lot of weirdness going on. It's a weird world that we're in. We'll definitely get into the world of Gotham when we get into the setting rankings. And then, but she's able to sort of, not necessarily tone it down, but as I said, she grounds it to sort of almost like give more sense to Bruce Wayne in a way, and so you do kind of believe the connection. She's not just there to be the leading lady of the film. I think there is that sort of point to her, and it's interesting. Much like Lydia, with her being a photographer, she's able to see things. Like, she's got that eye. She's able to sort of draw people out, and that sort of stems the sort of fascination with Bruce Wayne. She's not trying to, in fact, if anything, in the film, she spends more time trying to figure out who Bruce Wayne is more than figuring out who Batman is. And so that I found very, very interesting. She's like, oh, why is he going to this alleyway? Why is he, put these flowers down, what's with the particular street, and then finding out what really happened, and it's like, oh my god, that actually makes sense now. And then on the other end, you've got Alfred, played by Michael Gove. Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned Vicky Vale's played by Kim Basinger. I forgot to add their name. Michael Gove, who plays Alfred. What I like about this version of Alfred, I think there's all sorts of versions that I really like. I think I can only think of one Alfred that I didn't like, and I think that was the one from Gotham, the TV series. That's a whole other conversation. But anyway, what I like about Michael Gove's Alfred is that he really is like Bruce Wayne's only connection to his family. Like, he is sort of like his surrogate dad. He's sort of like this grandfatherly figure while still being his butler. He's much like Vicky, but he sort of grounds him to family, and and he wants that. He wants Bruce Wayne to have a sort of a normal life. But he realizes in some, like, you can kind of tell he's kind of uncomfortable with him dressing up as a bat and fighting crime. Like, I mean, wouldn't you be when you've known this person since they were a child, and they witnessed their parents' death in front of them? But it's like, in some ways he sort of understands, but he's uncomfortable with it, and he's like trying to convince him to, like, do normal things, like have a relationship, have a family of his own, all that sort of thing. So I think him and Vicky kind of balance the amount of strangeness that comes out from Batman and the Joker. So, even to this day, I love the way they handled it. I can see why Batman is one of the greatest superheroes ever, and it really stems from this movie. I mean, if it wasn't for this movie, I don't think I would have had... I don't think I would have had that drive to watch more Batman. I wouldn't have the drive to watch any superhero movie, really. So, and it's because of how well these characters are. Okay, coming in at number 4. Ooh, okay. We have Sweeney Todd. Oh my goodness, these characters are interesting. And, oh boy, where do we start? Well, I guess we'll start with Sweeney Todd, once again played by Johnny Depp. And what I particularly love about this particular performance with Johnny Depp, now you could argue this with a lot of his other characters. I mean, when you think about characters like the Mad Hatter or Willy Wonka or even Barnabas to an extent, they have this sort of weird energy, and he uses his body a lot with those roles. Sweeney Todd, on the other hand, he is just still, he is silent, but yet in those eyes, man, you can just see all that pain, all that anger, that obsession with revenge. I mean, Sweeney Todd really is a story about, the poison, the toxic that revenge has. And you see that in Sweeney instantly. Like, from the moment you see him, it's like he is dead already. He's never going to come back to his former life, even though, maybe at the beginning he has that sort of maybe glimmer of hope that he's going to come back to his wife and his daughter, but then actually finding out what happens to them. Like, again, during the song Poor Things, when he's told what happened, again, he doesn't move. But you can tell everything going on in his head, in his eyes, and oh my, I don't know how he does it. I really don't. It's why he's one of my favorite actors. I don't know how he does it. He just does it so incredibly well. And he and that's the same thing. He doesn't really say much. It's just all from that look and the way he looks at his razors. When my friends start, it's weird. It's like he's singing a love song to his razors, but you understand why. And he's and you're just waiting for those moments where he is just gonna snap, and we definitely see those moments. But oh my god, it's just that sort of internal rage. It's just ready to burst out. So then when you have Mrs. Lovett, played by Helena Bonham Carter, who's able to, I guess, keep him calm for a certain amount of time before the epiphany starts. And, as many people said, she's probably the most iconic character from the musical outside of Sweeney Todd, because of, this sort of, let's face it, she is a tragic character. She is mostly there, from the original musical, as sort of I don't want to say the comic relief, but she definitely has her hilarious side, especially from what Angela Lansbury gives. And I think Helena kind of gave it in this very subtle way. Again, she keeps it very minimal. But at the same time, they really played more on her sort of desperation to want to have Sweeney Todd for herself. And it's sort of almost like how Sweeney is blinded by his own revenge, she's blinded by her love for Sweeney. And I think a lot of the characters are kind of blinded in a way by their obsessions, whether it's Sweeney Todd, getting revenge on the judge, Mrs. Lovett with, wanting Sweeney Todd, Anthony wanting Joanna, Sweeney's daughter, Joanna wanting to be free, Alan wanting, Alan Rickman playing the judge, wanting Joanna, as well. Or, you could make the argument Pirelli, played by Sacha Baron Cohen, obsessed with being the number one Barbara. It really shows all these characters have this sort of obsession, and, that's what makes them kind of interesting and plays into that sort of, dark, horrific story. And let's talk about Alan Rickman as the judge. Oh, he's that kind of villain where you want to know what's going through his head, but at the same time you really don't want to know. He's able to kind of, he just gives me the creeps, and he just does it so well. And yeah, he's a very, very disturbing character, but yet Alan Rickman manages to draw you in, but then manages to push you back a little bit just so you don't get a bit too close, if you know what I mean. So, as I said, these characters are just fantastic. And I think it's from the fact that they're sort of done from it's so weird because it's a musical. You think a musical would be so over the top, but because these performances were kicked down a notch from normal musicals, I think it's what was needed. It was, I think as Burton described it, it was very much like watching silent acting. It was all in the facial expressions. It was all in their eyes. Exactly what was going through their minds. And yeah, I think these performances are fantastic. Fantastic. What more can I say? I love them. Love them, despite how horrific the story is. Okay, so coming in at number three. Okay, so a lot of people are probably wondering, why did I put these characters above Batman in Batman Returns? Now, I absolutely love the way they did the characters in Batman, but there's something about the characters in Batman Returns that just it fascinates me to this day. Every single time I watch it, I go, amazing characters, amazing acting. Oh god. Okay, so I don't know. Let's. I'm going to start off with. The Penguin in this one. Played by Danny DeVito, and okay, this is going to sound like a weird comparison, but go with me on this. I always see the Penguin slightly as like the Phantom of the Opera. And the reason I say that is because, oh, well, I mean, for one thing, they were both brought up in the sewer due to their, to their appearance and whatever. But I feel like he's much like the Phantom because if the world hadn't, or in this case his parents, hadn't treated him the way they did, you try to kill him in a river as a baby because of his appearance, he might have turned out okay. Like he becomes this, it's much like what Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, says. Evil isn't born; it's created. So Oswald might have had a chance if, he wasn't treated this way, and you see where that monstrous thing comes from, and you sort of see the tragedy in that, but you're also like horrified by him at the same time, that sort of unpredictable animalistic. That's the interesting thing about Batman Returns, is they really play on the more animalistic side of things, and the Penguin is obviously no exception. I mean, really, his only love that he has is for his penguins, because they are the ones who cared for him. So and and Danny DeVito really plays up that animalistic thing, like with his like little noises and the way he walks, and and he really uses that makeup to his effect. I mean, it's really fascinating to watch. And then we have, again, Catwoman, Selena Kyle, one of my favorite characters ever, one of my favorite performances ever, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. I'm sorry. As much as there are other good Catwomans out there, I'm not saying there's any bad ones, there are some that are very good, but they will never hold a candle to what Michelle Pfeiffer did. I don't even know where to start. Like, just seeing her transformation into Catwoman was just like, and it's not like you're not like you're desperate for her to like change into or like get into the alter ego or whatever. You're still enjoying seeing her as Selena Kyle. What I love is that at the very beginning, she's just in the background. She's just pouring coffee for all these people in the meeting. The vocal point is supposed to be, Max Schreck. But then, like, it's like you wouldn't guess that she's going to be a main character, but she does. I love when they do stuff like this. And, so the fact that having her in the background at the very beginning, it just shows just how, like, timid she is and whatever about this, and you just see just everything, around her is just, closing in on her almost. And it goes into the visual storytelling as well. And, you can kind of tell she has that bite, but just being in that world just really kind of suppresses her. And so when she does finally snap, you see that tension building, and the transformation scene. I probably explained this already, but like, it's one of those few moments where it was almost like I had an out of body experience watching it, if that makes sense. It's almost like as soon as like she puts on the suit and and it cuts to the next scene, I was like, whoa. I was just so taken by it. I just, wow. And then her going like, flip flop between, this the sadness, and the absolute madness, and the connection that she has with Bruce Wayne. Oh my god, I just love that, it's almost like Batman thinks that, he's able to like save her and whatever, but actually he's not as far gone as she is. And I think, it shows that interesting, parallel between the two of them. And this is shown visually in their costumes and their acting. I mean, even just the scene where, that brilliant moment where they're making out on the sofa and they're like trying to keep their hands away from like each other's scars. It just shows that sort of like they want to be together, but they can't be together. And that was done through that. And then, of course, the dance scene. Oh, love that scene. It was just so, so good. Where she's like, where he's like, who do you think you are? And she's like, I don't know anymore, Bruce. But then you could make the argument, doesn't Bruce not know exactly who he is? I just said that with the first one. And so oh my god, and their chemistry is just unbelievable. And then you've got characters like Max Schreck, played by Christopher Walken. Also, really good idea to name him Max Schreck after the actor who played Nosferatu, because his whole thing is, he's that, business CEO, and he wants to create this power plant, but instead of producing energy, he's actually draining the energy, very much like a vampire. And I love if we're going to go with the whole animalistic theme, the idea of like, the most quote unquote human looking character is like the most monstrous out of all of them. And, as I said, evil isn't born, it's created. And these characters really do. I'm always fascinated in watching them. And I knew they were going to be as high as they were on the list because, I mean, can you really blame me? They're just that fascinating to watch every single time. It's almost like I'm seeing something new all the time, or I'm seeing something very different from them. And, and it's not just from the characters solo. It's as, like there's that relationship between, the Penguin and Max Schreck in some ways. It's like, were they always playing each other? Was there a little bit of care until like they, and then, as I said, I've already explained my case with and Bruce. I mean, so good, so good, so good. I knew they had to be at top 3. Knew they had to be. So now we're down to the last 2, and you can probably decipher which 2 they are, because it's the 2 I haven't mentioned yet. And funnily enough, they have very, very similar names. Actually, no, they do have the exact same names. But which one is going to be number 1? Well, okay, starting with number 2. This was very close to becoming number 1. But there were a couple of characters where I kind of went, okay, I don't quite remember them as well. However, when it comes to the main character, oh boy, this is, as an exploration of a real person, this is definitely one of the more fascinating ones. At number 2, we have Ed Wood. As I've said, I've probably said this multiple times, the irony of this film is that even though it's about the all-time worst director of all time, I've said that twice now. Even though he is the worst director of all time, this film, based on him, is the most inspirational film to watch if you have any love in filmmaking, in movies in general, directing, whatever. And a lot of it comes down with how the character was tackled. And I always believe that I think if Burton wasn't directing it, I don't think it would have turned out as good as it is, or at least, and I think it's almost like he is the perfect director, because he really does relate to Ed. Granted, yes, he's more successful than Ed Wood ever was, but he approaches it in the same way. And I think reflecting that onto Ed and learning more about him and how he did it, because whatever people say, Ed always had that passion for making movies, and it was like that sort of feeling of thinking that you're making the best thing in the world and you're just so wrapped up in it and whatever. And then, unfortunately, even though you put your absolute heart and soul into it, it could be really, 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 really bad. And this is something that when I actually did watch, well, I haven't watched all of his movies. I've watched the I guess you could say the trilogy of films that are shown in Ed Wood, which is I've blacked out now. Glen or Glenda, Bride of the Monster, and Plan 9 from Outer Space. Yes, they're not good, but I could always sense that enthusiasm, that energy, that sort of wanting to tell these stories. It's just a shame he didn't exactly have the resources or the budget or like whatever, because yeah, it's like you can see the vision. You can definitely see there was a vision and there was an effort to use what he has. And it did make me think of like, you know, here I am, making YouTube videos, probably not very good ones. I am definitely not on the way to being any kind of good YouTuber. So why do I keep going? Why do I keep making these videos? Because I love doing it. It's as simple as that. I don't do it as a job. I don't do it, I don't do it just to get attention. I do it because I want to. I want to share my thoughts on, whatever I'm talking about. In most cases, the other films of Tim Burton, but I want to, share my love for them and do it in my own way. And when I watch Ed Wood, his character really reminds me of this is why I do what I do. Granted, it's in my spare time, but it's, it's doing it. I'm writing. I'm now, I'm doing the audio recordings right now. I'll be editing this soon, so hopefully soon. But so, and I think it all displays, and I think what Johnny Depp brings is such that energy and that sort of, I don't even want to say blind optimism. It's sort of like on the same leagues as Jack Skellington, but sort of different, where it's just sort of like, that sort of positivity that he just so believes in his films, even if they don't work out. It's like, oh, worst movie you ever saw. Well, my next one will be better. Because it's just like, like, how is that not inspirational? I don't know. Maybe you could argue there's that, in some ways you could say, yes, it's a bit delusional and whatever. But when you are in the midst of creating something, even if in a result it doesn't turn out that well, it will turn, you've done it, you've created it, you do it because you want to, and people will identify that. And I think that's why, in some ways, I think he has grown this sort of, I don't want to say following, but sort of this admiration almost, and maybe I don't think he is the worst director because you do see that passion and that optimism behind it. So I think, once again, if you are interested in filmmaking, this is a film that it is vital that you watch, really. Because it does show the, strengths and weaknesses and the obstacles that you have to go through. And I think Johnny Depp's performance does it in a way that, he's able to have that sort of optimism, that energy, that delusion, but still make it feel real. And I think what makes it real is his relationship with Bela Lugosi, played by Martin Landau, and who won an Oscar for supporting role, and quite rightfully so, because he sometimes, like, when I go back and I watch, Bela Lugosi's Dracula, and then I watch something like Ed Wood, I'm like, man, he nails it! Just everything. Mannerisms, voice, accent, just the whole demeanour. And obviously, it helps with the makeup they had, and like putting it in black and white. He was able to sort of show, he had this sort of like sense of like, you definitely had like, there's this legend, this horror legend in front of you, but yet you see that washed up aspect, and it really is sad what happened to Lugosi, pretty much, and and with his drug addiction and having to commit himself, and and whatever, and it sort of, in a way, it sort of depresses me that he was just like, yes, I'm finally getting attention, but he's only getting it because he's been committed, trying to, I don't know. Oh God, I'm getting really sad just thinking about it. It's like, it's a shame that's the only fame he got in his elderly years and whatever. And I think you see that genuine care between Ed and Bella. I mean, their scenes really are the best ones. You know, like you definitely see that, you know, obviously Ed admires Bella for who he is, you know, as Dracula, as this legend and whatever. But, you know, he does see this kind of this broken man, let's be real. And but like and he tries to, you know, find ways to get him back into like acting. It might not be essential roles, but like he really just wants to help out a friend. And I think, you know, yes, you could argue in something like Glen or Glenda. Yes, my biggest argument is that Bela Lugosi really wasn't needed in that film. But having that said, now knowing that all he wanted to do was to help out, you know, his friend who's like not getting any jobs and whatever. It's just like, oh, you know, it's like, okay, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Like I can see why he did it. You know, it's you know, it's that genuine bond. I mean, that really is the heart and center of the movie. And then and then I feel like I'm going a bit too on and on about the two main characters right now, but I'm just trying to think. Like the other characters are definitely memorable. You know, you've got Bill Murray. You know, you've got as Bonnie, and he's eccentric, but he generally looks up to Ed, and something like he's just his own little character, and I really really love him. You've got oh my goodness, why am I blacking out all of a sudden? This isn't good. And then you've got, actually, what was kind of interesting about the supporting characters is that you're kind of introduced to them pretty much from their professions, you know. So like the first time, you know, you see Griswold is from Predicting the Future. The first time you see Vampira is on her show. The first time you actually see Bela Lugosi, he's lying in a coffin, very much like Dracula, and you know, all that sort of thing. Oh yeah, I should probably mention about Sarah Jessica Parker's role. Now I know Dolores, I think some people might say that she may have been, I don't want to say vilified, but oh, she, you know, she was the one who was like, you know, acting too much and like, you know, decided to just break up the relationship and whatever. I mean, you could argue that, but like at the same time, I mean, I don't know what the real situation was between their relationship and whatever, but I can kind of see that sort of frustration in like, you know, she's like, she can see that these films are not very good, and yet everyone's like praising them left and right, and she doesn't get it. I think I can kind of see where she's coming from in that sense, and it's just like, you know, nothing's kind of going for her at all. I mean, it's not like she's got, you know, financial support or anything. I can kind of see why she left him and all that sort of thing. And then with Kathy, who did end up with Ed, you know, I really love that scene where he like, you know, okay, first date, I'm just going to straight up tell her that I like wearing women's clothes. And she just kind of thinks, and then just goes, okay. And I think that's how it should be. All you need to say is okay. And it's why I absolutely adore that scene. I think it's the way I wish the world was sometimes. Just say okay. Yeah. But anyway, so I think I've gone on enough, and I think it's all to do with, you know, Ed as a character and as a real person. You know, yes, his movies aren't good. Yes, he might have been delusional. Yes, he might have been absolutely eccentric, but at the same time, you see that passion. You see that, you know, he did have a vision. I will always say, I feel like if you gave him the time and the budget, he could have actually turned out something really, really special. Shame he didn't, but I'm glad that, you know, this movie is finally giving him the recognition that he deserves, and I think Johnny Depp does him complete justice. So, you can probably deduce which one's at number one. And I suspect this is no surprise to any of you because it is my favourite film of all time. And I was really stuck in between this film and Ed Wood, but I feel like with this film, I mean, not only do I think every single character is essential in this movie, the protagonist really does, in my opinion, sum up Tim Burton's protagonists as a whole. Like, I don't think you can get any better than this. So at number 1, for the best Tim Burton characters in his movies, we have Edward Scissorhands. And like I said, I feel like every single one of these characters has a point to them, whether it's the neighbours, the different types of neighbours. You know, you've got Peg, who's the first one who discovers Edward. You know, she was, as far as, you know, I think I might be wrong in saying this, but I think Burton once said that, you know, she was the kind of person that he wishes that his suburban neighborhood had. And, you know, I'm just going to say it. She kind of reminds me of my own grandmother in a way. Maybe because my grandma was also an Avon lady, but she has that sort of kindness and that caring. And, you know, I love how caring she is to Edward and to everyone else. You know, like, there was never a moment where she was ever mean or horrible or whatever. Even when something bad does happen, she tries to be very understanding. And I love that about her, you know. And whereas, you know, her husband Bill, you know, he basically, you know, he's sort of like, I guess you could say, the more realistic, I guess cynical, you know, it's just like, oh, you can't buy the necessities of life with cookies. Personally, why not? But, you know, he's like the sort of, you know, let's ground you back into reality. And, you know, this also goes when he's trying to teach, you know, Edward some ethics. You know, if you find a case of stolen money, what do you do with it? And then obviously you've got like Kevin, you know, their son, who's very, very, you know, sort of like, you know, ooh, by like Edward, and just like constantly wants to bring him to show and tell them whatever. And then you got the rest of the neighbors who sort of weirdly kind of treat him as like, oh, he's like this strange, unusual, you know, unknown thing. Ooh, it's fascinating. But as soon as something goes wrong, immediately turn their back. I mean, this really, I mean, is it me, or was this film way ahead of its time with, well, I don't want to say way ahead of its time, but certainly like with the amount of council culture that we have nowadays. I mean, is it kind of not ahead of its time in that as soon as like one thing goes wrong or like a misunderstanding happens, everyone's like, no, shun them. I don't want anything to do with them anymore, you know? And I think, you know, and you know, but, you know, at the beginning, they're just like, you know, oh, there's something different, there's something new, you know, like, but then, you know, whatever, they're not quite sure about it, whatever. And then you got a character like Jim, played by Anthony Michael Hall, and oh my god, he is on those list of characters that I absolutely hate, but you're supposed to hate. You know, he's up there with characters like Joffrey and Ramsay from Game of Thrones, or like Percy from Green Mile, or who was it? Like, who was wasn't he like a captain, the captain, or sort of like the stepdad from like Pan's Labyrinth? You know, he's up there with characters that I absolutely despise, and like the more and more the film goes on, the more I hate him. So, you know, because it's like the more he pushes and pushes, you know, Edward, oh my goodness, I hate that guy. But that is the point. And then you've got, oh, let's not forget about, you know, the inventor, you know, played by Vincent Price, you know, who created Edward, but he is that sort of, you know, it's like, what if, you know, Frankenstein actually cared for his creation, you know, and you see that genuine bond, and you see like him like educating him, but also making him have fun with a little bit of poetry. And then, you know, even just the little notion of giving his hands in a Christmas present. That is weirdly adorable, and I love it. And oh my god, it's so genuine. I love it. And then of course, if we've got the main love interest, which is of course Kim, played by Winona Ryder, and she, oh my god, I always feel like Kim is such an, I don't want to say underrated, but very underappreciated character. You know, people kind of just see her as the love interest and that's it. But actually, I feel like there's more to her. Like, you know, she's the only one at the very beginning, who has like this sort of horrified reaction to Edward, and like, and is sort of like, what is wrong with him? Like, what is wrong with his hands? Like, what is going on? But then as the film gradually goes, you see that she ends up being like the one character who actually sees him for who he is, manages to see past the hands. And I feel like this is not just from Renona's acting and like the writing of like her character evolution, but also from the visual storytelling. Again, I felt like I needed to explain it, so I did a video on it, on like, is Kim more than just a love interest? So if you want to check that out, there that is. But then you've got the main event himself, Edward. I've said, Johnny Depp is one of my favorite actors, and all of his performances on this list, him and Burton's collaboration is just absolutely magical. They create magic on screen. But there's something very, very special about the first time that they collaborated on Edward Scissorhands. And it was just that instant, I understand this character. I don't care if it may, I don't want to be seen as like this teenage heartthrob. I want to do this because I really relate to this character. And I think, as I've said, Edward really just sums up all of, like, I guess you could say, like, Tim Burton's most important theme in his movies, and that is the theme of the outsider. And Edward truly represents that in both, the character design and the acting that Johnny Depp brings. Again, sort of much like Sweeney, all he needs to do is give that look. I remember the first time I saw him coming out of the shadows, and I had no idea what this movie was going to be. For all I knew, it could have been a slasher film, judging by the title. But like, as soon as he comes out of the shadows, it's like, oh, I get it. It's like, oh my god. And then I was like, going through what I was going through at the time when I first saw this, I was like, it's almost like this character is speaking to me, like, directly to me. I've never had an experience like that in any movie before and after. And, it was like, he really shows that sort of, wanting to connect, but feeling cut off from the rest of the world. Even when he tries to, when Peg puts him in, Bill's old clothes, or, and he's, doing all of, his topiary and, dog grooming and, cutting the hair, he is never, there's always that cut off between him and the rest of the world. And, and it's like, no matter how hard you try, and, you see that in his love for Kim as well. That's why, the hold me scene is just so impactful as it is, because, he desperately wants to, he just can't. And at the end, I don't really give too much away, but obviously if this is, taking inspiration from the Frankenstein story, it's going to end in tragedy. But, and it's that sort of, but, he still gives, he still creates, he still does what he loves, that it's very inspiring. It's much like Ed Wood. He does it because he loves it, and it's giving to people. I don't know. I feel like I'm getting emotional just talking about him. Like, that's just how effective he is. And the fact that he's just so kind, so pure, it's almost like, oh, it's like every time you're making me love him even more. That's just going to make his downfall even sadder. And the fact that it all comes from a misunderstanding, because of course it does. Oh, it just breaks my heart every single time. And, and again, I don't want to get too much into it, because I feel like, obviously, I'm going to have to talk to it when I get to the ending, ranking. It's just having that sort of, I always see it as very bittersweet. It's not entirely sad, it's not entirely happy, but if anything, it's inspirational. Edward connects with people. he really is the symbol of the outsider as a whole. And I think the fact that, he's, no pun intended, he has touched so many people, just from what a brilliant character, from such a brilliant idea, you know, Burton was just sketching the idea of what he was feeling like, as an outsider. And I mean, he really embodies that emotion. And I think for that alone, as well as every single character having their, the point to them, it's, I think it really does deserve to be number one. Well, so that's my rankings for Tim Burton characters. I hope you enjoyed it. So next will be the rankings for Tim Burton settings. So this will be having to do with like the look, the production of the film, as I said, the setting of them. So this will be kind of interesting. It may take me a bit longer. I mean, as I probably joked earlier in it, I am probably going to this is probably going to come out after Wednesday season 2. So there may be a bit of a time lapse, just because I'm going to have to do a bit more research into it, and that's going to be the same for the other categories, which is going to be costume and makeup. So bear with me on this one, on those two rankings. I will try and work on them. Obviously, there's a few other videos that I'm thinking of working on as well. It's just, like even this character one was delayed. Things were just kind of thrown at me, or I wanted to work on other videos. And then when I was like, oh, finally, I actually get to, let's actually sit down. I can actually do the recordings. I ended up getting ill because, of course, I did. So, apologies that it's taking so long to get these rankings out. I will keep going. You just have to bear with me. But anyway, I do hope that you enjoy it. I hope to see you on the next rankings. And hope to see you in Burtonland again. Take care.